was on Bobby Albert's podcast a few months ago, and I don't actually know if the episode's released yet, but we went in depth on sales and cold email, all the traditional stuff that I constantly am asked about on podcasts. But I'm impressed by him because he has grown and sold several businesses. We'll do the bio in a second. He's a very impressive dude. And he grew up a couple hours from Dallas, which is where I went to high school. So we had a lot of stuff to talk about in that. But the main thing we talked about in this conversation is culture and leadership. Basically how to turn your business into a cult. You know, everyone's working for one big goal, how to create that type of environment where people actually want to work together to succeed. That is what Bobby specializes in, and that is what we wanted to talk about. He also went through some questions to ask to find your purpose in life or to find your key things. And I did that exercise on this podcast as well. Might be interesting for you to go through. So here it is, my full conversation with Bobby Albert. You can also grab this on Spotify or iTunes. Search Alex Berman Podcast and you can grab it there. Also, I'd love to know, do you like these longer episodes or do you want more of a condensed best of? Leave it down in the comments and I'll be happy to oblige whatever delivers the most value. So here's my conversation with Bobby Albert. Let's jump into it. Bobby Albert is the current president of Values Driven Leadership LLC. His passion is to help other leaders build inspiring workplace cultures through values-driven leadership. He recently had me on his podcast. He also has written 2 books, Principled Profits, Outward Success is an Inside Job, and his second book, True North Business, is scheduled to release in April 2019. Bobby uses a values-driven approach, and he's created a unique and special workplace culture. The best 100 companies to work for in Texas awarded their coveted designation to the Albert team for the first 2 years they applied for consideration. Welcome to the podcast, Bobby Albert.
Yes, thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you again.
For sure. And just so the audience has somewhere to go, what was the name of the podcast that you do now?
It's called Lead to Grow.
Lead to Grow. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast is because, and you guys go ahead and listen to the interview Bobby did of me as well. But on that interview, I was talking the entire time. And I know there's so much that you could share, Bobby. So I just wanted to sit down and ask you about values. Let's talk values-driven leadership.
Okay. Well, man, that's something I have a passion for. Today we have this brave new workplace where we've got the baby boomers on one end and the millennials on the other end. And Alex, you live in the digital marketing area, so you know how technology is really brought change into the workplace at warp speed change. And it's really redefining loyalty in the workplace. And those organizations that engage with employees in this brave new workplace will thrive. But I have to admit, those who fail to adapt will wonder what happened as their employees leave and their profits shrink. And that's the reason why I want to talk with you today about outward success is an inside job. One thing that I have found is that has to do about workplace culture. Often I get asked, Bobby, what is workplace culture? Well, there's some formal definitions out there, but to be honest with you, sometimes they can be kind of confusing. But the thing that I have found about culture is, if I can use this example, I live in Texas, and the wind blows a lot outside, and I do a lot of bicycling, and so I'm always concerned about the direction of the wind and the velocity and all those kind of things. So, but one thing is about culture is that, and it's like the wind. Has anybody ever seen the wind? No one's ever seen the wind. But what we see are the effects of the wind. And if I went outside right now, I'd see the leaves in the trees moving. I can see the bushes shifting back and forth because of the wind. What I'm seeing are the effects of the wind, and culture is a lot like that. And one thing I have found about culture is workplace culture is that It's the fruit and not the goal. Now, Alex, since you're in that digital market area, and because of where you're located, you're very familiar with technology companies and things of that nature. And often I read about where technology companies are wanting to make sure their people are happy so they can be more productive. And the thing I've learned about culture is it's not what I get out of my people, it is what I give them. Without expecting anything in return. And let me just, give you a thought here is that I read about often that people think, well, if I provide all the food and beverage that people, willing to eat and drink free, I bring in ping pong tables, allow them to use skateboards, in the place of business, all those kind of neat things. And if they're happy, they'll be more productive and therefore I'll make more money.
You're quoting word for word a founder that I used to know.
Oh, really?
We were at a company party and he had just bought a dartboard and he's like, yeah, I heard you just buy him a dartboard. And that's enough. That's enough for culture. Like he literally said that exact thing you just said.
Well, so what happens is that when someone goes to that level, it becomes the goal rather than the fruit. If you take a fruit tree, it's amazing that it takes 2 to 5 years before a fruit tree will produce beautiful fruit. But what does a farmer do when they plant a fruit tree? They first they go through a great lengthy process over many years. They go to great lengths of preparing the soil. Then they water the tree. They cultivate the tree. They prune the tree over all that time by doing the right thing. And eventually it produces this beautiful fruit. And what I have found is the roots of a tree comparing to the business is what I call, there's some essentials that must exist in the business. And that is the core values, like you mentioned earlier, the purpose, the vision, and what a term I use, super objectives in a nonprofit or government. It may be related to a mission statement. And the trunk of the tree is the effective leadership. And when those 5 essential components are there, it produces this beautiful fruit, which is a culture. And when a culture, every organization can have a culture where people thrive and profits soar. And today, let's maybe just talk about one of the essentials about the core values.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm wondering, I don't think I even said this in the intro, but you sold a company to a publicly traded company, right, in 2011.
Well, that's true. And if here in just a little bit, maybe I can share the kind of success we had leading up to that sale.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, after you sold, so going from this, because you were really known for your leadership, it seems like, and building this unique culture, I'm wondering how that changed after you sold.
Well, it didn't really change. It's just that I'm living my second half of life. I'm enjoying life. The company that bought me, they financially blessed me to a point that I don't have to work anymore. And I'm just doing this because my purpose has been about making a difference in people, for people, and through people.
That's interesting. How did you decide to, because I don't want to say I'm in a similar situation, but it's like recently I had this insight where it's like you can kind of do whatever you want. And so you're definitely in that place. How did you decide to write a business book, or like why did you decide to go in this direction? Because it seems like you could have done any number of things, infinity things even.
Yes, well, a good question. Going way back in the 90s, if you can imagine that, people have had me speak and do workshops at trade associations, at companies and things. And I'm just doing it because I enjoy talking about these kind of things. And people kept saying, Bobby, you need to write a book about this. Well, I'm trying to think, man, I got a business to run. I don't have time to write a book or, talking about leadership and workplace culture. And so once I sold the company, it's like, okay, I've got time on my hands, and it's time to start writing about this. And it's hard to believe that actually have written about 200,000 words. And I'm not a writer because, to be honest with you, I don't enjoy uh, really writing, but I've had to learn the discipline of writing on a regular basis.
That's interesting. So what led you to, if you don't enjoy the day-to-day, what led you to write the book?
Well, what led me to is that we experienced such success in our company, and in my industry, we had profits way over what people would even expect. And so I felt like I had something to share to make a difference in people. And I'm not so much about success as I am about significance. And I would love to be able to achieve significance by making a difference in people.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Perhaps a starting point was to talk about core values, because we saw something very significant happen in our company when I introduced our core values. The author, his name is Jim Collins. He wrote a book called Good to Great. He's pretty well known about that. And one thing that in his book, and he also wrote another early book called Built to Last, is that he took public traded companies from 1926 to 1990. And what he found during that time period is there was a group of companies that outperformed the average stock market 2 times. Now, today we would have probably liked to have invested in those companies. But he also found a small group of companies that outperformed the stock market by 15 times. I mean, that's so incredible that it's almost like, is that really true, and things. And so they dug deeper into research, and Jim Collins mainly is a researcher, but he writes well, as to how did those companies come about to outperform the stock market 15 times during that time period. Many of these companies had been in existence for over 100 years. So what was unique about them? And not only that, during that time period, there was a depression, there was multiple recessions, the economy going up and down. They had multiple wars that took place during that time period. How did those companies were that successful? And what they found was 2 simple components of those companies. And he used the term to preserve the core, stimulate progress, preserve the core and stimulate progress. And what he was talking about is on preserve the core was that there was 2 pieces of that. And that was the core values and purpose of the organization never changed from the day they were founded. But everything else was on the table for change. And that was the stimulating progress. Everything. I mean, I'm talking about organization structure, products, services, compensation schedules. You could, policies and procedures. You could go on and on. And those were constantly changing over many, many years. So one thing in my own company, going way back in the 90s, our employees pretty well knew what our purpose and our vision was. They had heard me talk about it for years. But one thing that I kept thinking, something is missing. And I finally discovered that it was our core values that was missing. And then I knew that as a leader, is that the core values really came from the leader. And it took me 2.5 years to figure out who I was. So this is a question to the listening audience that is perhaps maybe one of the most important questions ever been asked is, and Alex, you can think about it even for yourself. Who are you?
Well, I have my other employees have reflected who I am back on me, and it is somebody who is just riffing hard, making a lot of typos, etc. And I can combine.
Yeah.
I have two companies where it's just me as the head, and then my other main company, Experiment 27, has Robert as the CEO. And his company, where he's the CEO, is super corporate. Like everything's perfectly spelled and everything. But then the other two companies I'm running, it's just like my employees will spam me with messages, like 5 messages in a row. And I think that's who I am, at least right now.
Well, when you really dig into, who are you bone deep? Who are you? And that gets to your core values. Now, actually, it took me 2.5 years to figure out who I was. And I finally put together some tools, some questions to ask that other people don't have to spend that long to try to figure out who they are. But when I was faced with that, those core values, they had always been in our company. I just finally figured out how to express it. And thank goodness our human resource department, our HR department, was hiring people based on what they thought. They didn't know to call it core values, but what the kind of people that Bobby Albert was looking for. So one thing that there was a phrase I came up with before I figured out who I was. And it was this, is I want to be a values-driven company that achieve results, not a results-driven company that has values. See, what I find is most people are led to drive for results. Basically what the leader is saying, I want more money, I want more money, I want more money. But what I found in our company is that if I focus on driving the values-driven kind of company, is that we got not only good results, we got excellent results in our company. Now, most people wonder, well, what are core values? Well, they're general guiding principles of behavior. And the way I would explain it to our people, this is how we are to behave in our company as we pursued our purpose, as we pursued our vision, as we pursued our super objectives or mission, as we pursued the strategies, the tactics, and the measurable goals. This is how we behave. This is how we behave between us and with our customers and even suppliers. This is how we behave. And so, what they're not, and I find many companies that are so results driven, and I've been in companies where they may have a list of core values in their lobby, but if I go out and ask their employees what are the core values, the employees don't know.
Because I've been an employee at companies that have core values, and I remember specifically one time this company I was at just painted them on the wall. And I couldn't care. Like, not only could I not care, I felt offended that they thought maybe I didn't have these values, like they feel the need to plaster them on the wall.
Yeah.
Do you think employees feel that way? Is that like a common thing?
Yes. My experience, there's not very many companies that know their core values. Not only the leader knows it, but the employees know. Is the key is authenticity. Is that if the reason why our core values were so strong in our company, because it was who I was and it was how I was living them out, even though I finally, it was years before I figured out how to express them. So in other words, if we have a list of core values, but I didn't live that way, that's not being authentic. Mm-hmm. So the employees were like, okay, I see those core values, but that, they're just, this is one thing to what core values are not. They're not something that what you aspire to be, that you would like to obtain someday. It's not something that looks good as marketing material or looks good on a website or it's something that you put in a proposal to gain, financing at the bank. There are something that looks real pretty, on paper or up on a wall. That's not what core values are. They have to be lived out. And I had just to give you a flavor of what I had to go through to figure out who I was. I had to ask myself some tough, tough questions. Like, Bobby, what do you stand for? What are you all about? Why did you say what you just said? Why did you do what you just did?
Right.
And why was it even important for you to say and do what you just said and did? I tell you what, I couldn't come up with good answers.
That's interesting.
But it took me through this process that I kept asking those kind of questions for months and months. And finally, one Sunday afternoon, it was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to figure out who I am. And so I sat down. This was at my house, and I have what I call my thinking chair. And that's in addition to my bicycle, since I use my bicycle as a thinking chair. And I pulled out a yellow tablet, got my pen, and I made a T-chart. And I started asking myself, okay, all right, I'm sitting here now. Something's got to come. So I started thinking, all right, I'm going to do this. What are words that describe that I'm passionate about? I get excited. I get fired up when these things are done. So I wrote several words down. And on the other side, I started thinking, well, I'm going to look at the other side of the coin here. And when things are not done, I get angry, I get upset, I get foaming at the mouth because they don't get done this way. So I wrote down some words to describe that. And one thing that really surprised me, there were 6 words that were identical on both sides of the T-chart. And the more I looked at them, I kept looking at them. And I started thinking, that is who I am. And so
What were the words?
I wrote, what's that?
What were the words?
Well, what it stood for is they were personal growth, integrity, add value, is excellence, relationships, and significance.
Interesting.
Now, those were the words that I found on that sheet. Now, I added, to give more emphasis to the behavior. In other words, like the first one was to pursue personal growth. In other words, it's a continuous process. Live with integrity, add value to others, and so forth. Now, what was really fascinating is, and this is how we instill this for sure in our company, is I shut down the whole company for a half a day. And we talked about these core values. And before doing so, I got with a graphics company to help me in the description. And I listed like those words, I just mentioned. And the graphics company came back and said, Bobby, did you realize that your keywords spell givers? And I was thinking, wow, well, that fits me as well, because I'm more interested in giving than I am, receiving. So we created a logo just with the word givers on it. And we gave T-shirts to everybody. Now, I tell you what, in our company, because it was common every year, we'd shut down the company for a half a day for a meeting. And this year was so different because they got a new T-shirt they'd never seen before, and it had the word givers. Well, I tell you what, when you create such a high interest like that, everybody shows up on time at the meeting. And this was the basic thing of the gist of the whole half a day, going through the 6 core values and what they were. This is what we did. We, on television, is that, there's this famous a game show called the Wheel of Fortune. Well, we created, we had people seated at tables, kind of rectangular length, tables, and we'd have 6, and occasionally we might have had 7 or 8 people, but each table had a game board. And, in the Wheel of Fortune game show, you guess the phrase. Well, I wanted our people to go through a discovery process themselves. And so they had a game board like on the first one, Pursue Personal Growth. So they played that game to learn to guess what that phrase was. And the table that guessed the phrase was supposed to yell out givers. Now, I tell you what, people were really getting into this game. The reason being because behind me was this huge spinning wheel with prizes. Now, we didn't have any like a 60-inch, color television or anything like that on the prizes, but they were some really nice prizes. I mean, people were standing up at their table playing that game. And after we would do that one core value, then I would share where that came from. And people heard stories about me when I was even a little boy that they never even heard of before. And then the third thing we did is, the first thing was play the game. Then they heard me talk about the value. The third thing was we had a flip chart for each table, their own flip chart. And they were supposed to go to that flip chart to discuss how are we going to live out that core value in our company. And we just kept going through and it took us a whole half a day to go through that. And I always do this after we have these meetings. I walk around the property and ask people how the day goes or something we could do different and improve on and those kind of things. And this was the common language I was hearing. People were saying, Bobby, this is who we are. This is who we are. And so we introduced that in 2005, and I sold the company in 2011. And during that time period, in late 07, 08, 09, 2010, the economy was in the tank. And Alex, you might have even been impacted, by the weak economy during that time period. But even at that, our company, our revenue grew about 5 times and our profits grew over 5 times.
What did the company do?
Well, it wasn't a glamorous business. It was the moving business. Now, 99% of our business was like moving people from California, like where your office is, California to Illinois, from Florida to Virginia, from the state of Washington, the state of Connecticut. That was most of our business. And so we experienced, even beyond the tough economic times, that we had that kind of revenue and profit growth.
That's interesting. My big insight from this story is your values must have really matched your company culture. Because it's like if I was an employee in that company, it came out of nowhere, that kind of thing, would have hated it. It reminds me of Catholic school too much. Just like going out in field days and stuff.
Well, one thing I found was when people have fun, and I wasn't doing it just for fun's sake, like playing the game things, but when people are having fun, they're more open to learn. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like while their mouth's open with laughing, I can throw in some, something educational, in their mouth. But let me share this. If I can, you already mentioned about that the 2 years leading up to me selling the company, we were also recognized as one of the 100 best companies to work for in the state of Texas. But the other thing was during this time period, and I was seeing it beforehand, but I really saw this. In human resource terms, they call it discretionary effort. And what it is, discretionary effort is when people give over and above what's required of them in their job. I have this quote that's I keep around in the office, and it's by a guy named Clarence Francis, if I can share this with you. And what it says is that You can buy someone's time. You can buy someone's physical presence at a given place. You can even buy a measurable number of skill muscular motions per hour or day. But you cannot buy enthusiasm. You cannot buy devotion of hearts, minds, and souls. You have to earn these things.
It's true. I was actually thinking about my core values as we're talking. I think I got 4 so far. Authenticity. 2 is being true to your word. 3, acting in good faith. And then 4, being curious and creative. I'd say if my team could be doing all that, if I'm doing all that, I'd be in a good spot.
Yeah. Well, one thing Jim Collins found in his research, and this is not maybe it doesn't sound, very good, but it was the term he used. In those organizations that outperform the stock market 15 times, the average stock market 15 times, inside that organization, because everybody had the same core values. He said that in the research, what they found, it was like a cult inside the organization. Mm-hmm. So the key is, it doesn't mean that somebody's a good person or a bad person, but the strength is the core values are authentic and they are lived out not only by the leader, but all the leaders, and also that the employees that are hired have the same core values.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is kind of like a cult a little bit, because it's like if anyone strays from the values, it's pretty easy to see that they'll either be, put back in place or they'll get removed from the company over time.
Yeah, well, when he was a student intern, he worked at a company that he had an idea about doing something. I can't remember what it was right now, but the employees that he was working with, as an intern, said, well, we really can't do that. And he asked, well, why? This is a great idea. And they said, well, that's not who we are. And so, and he, after he got finished his school, and did his research, he found, well, you know what? They were right. They knew exactly what they needed to do and what they didn't do.
I was listening to, Noah Kagan is this other business guy, and he used to work at Facebook. And he was telling the story on his podcast about Mark Zuckerberg, where basically Noah was always constantly trying to pitch Mark on like business ideas. Like, hey, if we target these guys with ads, we can make more money. This was in like their first year or two. And Zuckerberg was always saying, don't worry about money at all. It's target only user growth. And Noah was fired from Facebook for not seeing that. And then it's like, he was talking about this on his podcast. He was like kicking himself because he's like, Mark Zuckerberg was 100% correct about where the company needed to go at the time.
Yeah. Well, what we just discussed is how an organization can have outward success as an inside job. And it really kind of comes down to the starting point really is the core values, and along with all the other essentials. And this is how you can build a culture where people thrive and profits soar.
Awesome. Bobby, where do you want people to go after this podcast?
Well, I tell you what, thank you for asking. Simply to go to bobbyalbert.com. That's my website, or they can email me at it's pretty simple, bobby@bobbyalbert.com. And of course, I've started recently this podcast called Lead to Grow with Bobby Albert.
And check out the Alex Berman episode of Lead to Grow.
Exactly. That was a great interview.
For sure. All right, Bobby, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you want more content like this, subscribe to the podcast. If you want more in-depth B2B sales training, of course, check out the YouTube channel, b2bsalestraining.org. And if you need marketing support for your digital agency, Experiment 27 helps digital agencies grow their number of leads by building lead generation systems. That is Experiment27.com. There's also notes on all the podcast episodes there and free sales courses, which we've gotten some very good feedback about. You can also check out my social media. I'm on Twitter, Alex Berman with no E, ALX Berman. or Instagram, Alex Berman 1. Till the next episode, I will see you later.